Well, another of DC Comics this last week just felt like another installment in their respective series, but Nightwing, wow, really stood out to me as something special. Hey, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues Weekly, where I talk about DC Comics 1 week after their release on the Ultra tier of the DC Universe Infinite subscription service. In each installment, I pick an assortment of comics to talk about, of course, as a DC fan, but also explore what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, full spoilers for everything I talk about. This is your first and only warning that many spoilers lie ahead. Right now, we're taking a look at comics originally released to the Ultra tier on April 16th, 2024, and originally published on March 19th, 2024. I'm mostly just going to hit some basic thoughts for most of these and then focus in on Nightwing at the end. First off, Justice Society of America number 9. I really like what Geoff Johns has been doing in this book. I love the way he's kind of doing his flavorful retconning of the Golden Age, introducing all these sidekicks that he's really creating for the first time, but that is proposing that they actually did exist. We have all just forgotten about them, and the design of those characters is very true to the flavor of the Golden Age. And so I like a lot of what he's doing, both in terms of the new characters he's creating and the characters that he's referring to and bringing back and breathing new life into. However, one thing I noticed with this issue is it's spread too thin for me. There are too many different characters that are each getting a small amount of attention instead of really focusing in on a few characters at a time. And I think back to his initial run on the JSA back in the mid to early 2000s, and how in those early issues he would, of course, have issues that were focused on the team as a whole, but there were, I think, a smaller number of team members, and he would also spend time every few issues leaning more heavily into one character and really playing them up and helping us get to know them and to understand what motivates them. And I just don't see that happening in the same way here, and as a result, I always feel like I'm waiting. I'm getting teased at the things that I anticipate enjoying about a Geoff Johns run of Justice Society of America, but we're never quite getting to it because he's never quite spending the time I want him to really help me care about these characters. And so it always feels like a bit of a tease. I'm just waiting for it to really hit those sweet spots and do the things that I think he does best. But we don't seem to be getting there. That certainly doesn't mean I'm not going to be reading Justice Society. I mean, I can't help but want to continue reading, and I am enjoying, or at least I'm finding very interesting what I am reading of this run, but it's not quite the mode that he was in that I really enjoyed about his writing in his initial run of Justice Society of America. So that's Justice Society of America number 9. Green Lantern War Journal number 7. I have very little to say about this. John Stewart's still out in space and interacting with kind of strange characters one that kind of looks in his design like Mark Twain randomly in space. And I don't know, that kind of weird conceptual kind of approach to things that you can encounter in space, I'm not into. I'd rather it was really more hard sci-fi feeling than kind of like slightly silly. Like, okay, this completely alien being just happens to look human and kind of looks like Mark Twain. I mean, I don't understand this, So that's not my style of space fiction. But I do like that they're continuing to hint and suggest that the replica of John's sister that he left behind, kind of endowed with some of his own personality traits or what he remembers of his sister, to take care of his ailing mother, that story is being jumped back to periodically, and there is some trouble brewing there with him having left that projection or recreation of his deceased younger sister to take care of his mom. So right now I'm really hanging on because of that story, and because I anticipate that we are going to get John back to that situation, which is the one that I really care about. Moving on. Batman Superman World's Finest number 25, the oversized 25th issue. This, about half of it is a one-shot story about the first time, or one of the first times, that Lex Luthor and the Joker were really kind of interacting with each other. It's a one-off story. I don't know that it's going to really significantly play into, you know, what's coming in this series, or if it's planting seeds or whatever. Maybe, but it just kind of felt like oh hey, let's take the opportunity here to show these two characters butting heads with each other, and that's always interesting, but it doesn't seem to be really majorly feeding into what's coming. After that is a story that does seem to be indicating what's coming, and it doesn't have me excited because it involves Mr. Mxyzptlk, and I'm just like, oh man. Mark Waid is writing this book. He's also writing Shazam right now, which is leaning into kind of the sillier side of the history of that character. And I just don't really like silly comics and silly comic book ideas. Mr. Mxyzptlk, I really typically don't like him either. And so seeing that, oh crap, we've got a story arc coming up that's really going to lean heavily into him. Every once in a while you can write that character in a way that feels darker and more serious and twisted and weird and stuff, and I, in those rare instances, have enjoyed those stories. But when he's just played for comic relief, it doesn't make me laugh. I don't find him funny or charming. I'm just like, can we move along? This is just, you know... So anyway, I don't think I'm going to be looking forward to that, and it could be something that gets me to jump to just drop the book until at least that story arc is over, if not a new creative team takes over. Next up, Wonder Woman #7. Now, I really thought that this would be one comic this week that, like, oh, I'm going to really be into this, because I've been super engaged with Tom King's run on Wonder Woman, but this is a break from that. It is written by Tom King, but it takes place just after the events of Wonder Woman #5, and it's a pretty light-hearted story just about Wonder Woman and Superman trying to pick out a birthday gift for Batman. Now, on one level, you'd think, well, that's light and superficial, and so that's not going to be really interesting to me. And to the degree that it was those things, it wasn't something that I was interested in. But it still gave some opportunity to lean into who these characters are, what they think and feel about each other. And so mixed in with the lighthearted silliness that I didn't have a lot of patience for were these little beats that reminded me what makes these characters different, what leads them to put those differences aside and work together. And it ended with a moment that was kind of a little bit of a minor emotional beat as Batman gets his gift, and we see, kind of what happens with that. I would have liked it to be even more touching and more emotional, but I mean, it was satisfying enough. But even so, I was like, I didn't need this. I wanted to keep going with the major story that's been going on with Wonder Woman, and how she and the Amazons are just at odds with the U.S. government and all the stuff that's been going on there. That's been really cool stuff. And so this break right here is like, ugh. I don't know. So anyway, I'm looking forward to getting back to the main story, hopefully next month in Wonder Woman #8. Not Teen Titans, Titans #9. As the cover indicates, Amanda Waller is a significant part of this story, and it doesn't have the banner of, like, what is it called? Absolute Power, whatever the story arc coming up that's really going to feature Amanda Waller and her trying to gain power in the DC universe. I'm really interested in seeing where that story goes, but this doesn't have the banner associated with that upcoming crossover, and I don't know that it's really, like, crucial to that. However, she's a big player these days, or is becoming one, in the DC universe, and so on that level, I was kind of interested in seeing what was going to happen. But the story going on right now with Raven being overtaken by Trigon and becoming like this dark evil person, and the other Titans don't know about it yet. They haven't picked up on the fact that she's acting a little bit suspicious. I don't know. I don't find it super interesting. I think what I want to see with Titans is for them to become the replacement to the Justice League that was kind of implied they were going to be months ago when the Justice League disbanded. And it seemed like what they were doing was saying, okay, now the Titans, with the Justice League being disbanded, are really going to step up, and this is going to be their opportunity to become like Justice League iconic status. But it just kind of feels like another run of the Titans right now. And I think there were opportunities to really play up some big moments with these characters, give them some big splash pages doing their thing. And I think in part the art is not supporting some of the iconic vibe that I would love for these characters to each have. These characters have been around for so long, and yet I still feel like I don't super know who Starfire is. I certainly don't consider her to be this iconic character. Cyborg, he had some time in the Justice League, and so I would love for them to play him up more, give him some iconic moments. I think this just needs the sort of summer blockbuster treatment. I think each of these characters needs some really big, epic moments that show us, wow, this character's awesome. I would love for Tempest to convince me that we don't need Aquaman. I mean, the guy has the power to telekinetically manipulate water, which gets a moment here, but it's one of several panels on a page. I'm just like, oh man, come on, play this guy up. He's got such cool powers and stuff going on. And so I don't feel like the Titans have been coming into, I don't want to say their own. They've certainly been their own thing for decades. But to get Justice League status, they haven't shown me that they're there yet. I'm still waiting for that. Moving on, Superman number 12. This is, I don't know, is it the end of the story arc? I think it's kind of the end of the story arc of the Lex Luthor Revenge Squad with Graft and Pharma and the Chained and stuff like that. By the end of this issue, all those villains are kind of taken care of, including Lex Luthor's mom is being put away. And but still, Superman, we're still going with this arc of Superman running Supercorp, renamed and given to him by Lex Luthor himself, who is in prison but still able to communicate. They're able to communicate with each other all the time. And it's Lex Luthor's desire that they work together, even while he's in prison, with Lex Luthor advising Superman because he believes they could do so much good together. And he's really been trying to convince Superman that he has turned over a new leaf. And yes, he's still a very selfish person, but ultimately he wants the best for his city, for Metropolis. And there are elements of that really come into play here, that he has to, in some pivotal moments, convince Superman that he has turned over a new leaf. I think up to this point, the potential that I saw for this interplay between Superman and Lex Luthor has just not been lived up to. I think they maybe spent too much time focusing on this Revenge Squad stuff. I really think that what I would have liked better for this concept of Superman and Lex Luthor working together, with Superman sort of being, or excuse me, with Lex being sort of the man in the chair, even though he's in prison, you know, advising Superman who's out in the field. I think there could have been so much greater focus on that relationship, that interplay, and just made the things that they're working through together, I don't know, just some villain of the week that wouldn't really matter. The thing I'm most interested in is these two characters and how they butt heads but yet are working together. I think that's so interesting. And so all this stuff about digging up Lex Luthor's past as like a short-lived superhero, and he's got this rogues gallery and all this kind of resurrected stuff we didn't know about his past being the focus so much for so many of these issues in this run so far, I think it distracted from the material that had the best potential. And I think there's still opportunity for them to lean into that more. I hope they do going forward. But up to this point, I've been disappointed that they haven't tapped into what I think is the potential of that concept near as much as they could have. All right, so now let's wrap up talking about Nightwing 112. This was the second part of a story in which Nightwing and Batman realized that a child who just lost his parents, even though it seems like his uncle, I think it's his uncle, is going to be like taking care of him, there's indications at the end of the last issue that, oh wait, this might be going south and he might actually be in the hands of a bad man, and we got to figure out how to rescue this kid. So it gets very personal for both of them, as I mentioned when I talked about issue 111 of Nightwing, because they both lost their parents at young ages, as this boy just has. So the story already was kind of putting pieces in place to have those emotional connection points, but they took it even further in this issue. They take the opportunity to show Batman kind of reflecting on memories of raising Dick Grayson and training him and helping him work through his emotions, really that father-son dynamic. And it's really being leaned into in a way, I feel like, that it wasn't maybe 10 years ago, but now we really hear these characters being referred to as father and son. Now, I think there is a little bit of retconning with that, because I think for years in comics, Bruce was not referring to Dick as like, and the two of them being a family. I feel like that's something that developed later. And so in this flashback, when we have Bruce saying to to Dick, yeah, this is what we have to do. This is what our family does. I'm like, I don't know if I like that. I like the idea that it took, a decade for Bruce to get to the point where he's thinking of he and Dick as a family, as a small but a very real family. Nevertheless, I like that we have arrived at this point now, and it's emphasized a little bit in a conversation with Barbara and Dick. The two of them are, I think, like an ongoing love interest and couple. I'm not sure how consistent and how much Dick ends up flirting and sleeping with other women. I don't know, but I do like the idea of them being a monogamous couple and, teasing at the idea that one day they could be married. But, as Barbara is talking to Dick about just the situation, she says regarding Bruce wanting to really figure out what's going on with Dick and his fear of heights that has suddenly kind of come upon him. She says, it's a mystery, Dick. He wants to solve it because he's one of the world's greatest detectives and he's your dad. And I'm still getting used to this, used to the dad language being used for Batman. But I do find that I'm liking it. And I think probably a lot of that has to do with me being in a different stage of life now. I've always loved father-son stories. I've always found them moving. But certainly when I became a dad myself, they gained a whole new dimension to them. And so I do appreciate them kind of leaning into that in a new way recently. Now, before I get back to some more of that father-son stuff, there's a really interesting kind of side scene that I'm surprised is even in this issue, because I had to remind myself, this is not an issue of Titans, this is an issue of Nightwing. And yet we step aside for a brief scene between Batman and Gar, Changeling, Beast Boy, who says to him, Batman, could I have a word? He says, since Beast World, which was a crossover I didn't read, but as I understand it, it just involved something related to Beast Boy turning most people in the world into anthropomorphic animals, which is why I skipped the story. But anyway, the fallout from that is that so many people in the world are afraid of Beast Boy now, or they hate him, or, and so he says to Batman, how do you deal with people being scared of you? And Batman replies, do you do this to be liked? And he replies, no. Batman simply then adds, no. And he adds, you do this to help. Gar says, yeah. And I think this is such a valuable little illustration that I don't know if it applies to any demographic more than to Christians. Now, it's not that I think that parallel is intentional. I have no reason to think that Tom Taylor would be making that parallel intentionally, but let me share just a little bit more of this so you can get a little more context. He says, Batman says, you do this to help. Gar says, yeah. Batman adds, and you didn't just help, you saved the world. It's hard for people to see the truth when they're holding torches and pitchforks in front of their faces. But anyone who hasn't been blinded by manufactured outrage, anyone with an ounce of sense or logic can see that you're a hero. You saved everyone on the planet, Garfield Logan. Nothing else matters. So why do I think that this particularly just illustrates well the Christian experience? Well, I don't think it applies to all Christians. I think that there are Christians that are unnecessarily causing offense instead of merely the gospel itself being the only thing about them that is causing offense. So I think for that, strand of Christians, that's a problem. This does not apply to them. But there are others who are certainly aiming, hopefully myself included, to not cause offense apart from what the gospel itself causes, and how that causes offense in people's hearts and minds. As Christians, we are endeavoring to represent the saving truth of Christ. We're not saving the world ourselves by any stretch, but we are at least hoping to represent Christ in such a way that those who gain some understanding of who Jesus is and what he has done through us can arrive at a point of salvation and eternal life through Jesus. But in the midst of trying to represent Christ, trying to share that truth, we run into the situation where people take offense at that and direct hatred toward us. And Jesus said, if the world hated me, they're going to hate you too. I mean, so this is something that we are meant to expect. Now, I think that superheroes like the X-Men, like some of the Titans, I think that they can be used and have been used over the years to represent different demographic groups, whether that's related to sexuality or related to, ethnic race and stuff like that. But I mean, religious groups as well. Just people that are disliked, hated, or feared because of something about them. They're disliked, hated, and feared unfairly. I think the comics have been used to parallel those kinds of things. I think in recent years they have more leaned into, and I think intentionally so, paralleling demographics that are associated with certain ethnicity or sexuality. But what's unique here in this unintended, probably, parallel is that Logan is hated, and at the same time he is also trying to bring rescue to people. He's trying to help people. And that is not intrinsically true of someone who is hated because of their race or hated because of their sexual inclinations or their gender identity. Now, there may be those in those demographics that are wanting good for the world, but it's not intrinsically attached to their demographic. Whereas Christians, we would say that our identity is in Christ, and it is because of us living out that identity in Christ that as we are endeavoring to bring truth to others that will bring rescue to them, it is because of that we are hated, or in some cases maybe even feared. And so I think this is such a striking parallel that seems to uniquely connect to the Christian experience, probably in an unintended way. I think there are other things that it could parallel as well. Maybe soldiers that are fighting an unpopular war, maybe police officers who are getting a bad name because of the misdeeds of other police officers, things like that. But it is very striking to me here how well this parallels what many Christians feel and experience. And I think Batman's words to Gar here are important for us to remember. When he asks, "Do you do this to be liked?" And Gar says, "No." And Batman says, "No, you don't. You do this to help." And that's what really needs to be driving us, a desire to love and help others. And to realize that some people are not going to be in a reasonable place. There will be something about, hopefully it'll only be the gospel that causes offense, but there may be something that causes them offense and they're just not thinking reasonably. They've got other things going on that are keeping them from truth. And we need to content ourselves with realizing that, okay, well, I am making myself available and trying to love people to the end of being here for those who are interested in truth. And the other kinds of difficult interactions are just things that we are as Christians called to endure, because we're not living this life for Christ to be liked, but to love and help others. Okay, getting back to some of the father-son stuff, there was a really moving moment where Batman and Nightwing are in the middle of action together, and Batman, we're taken into his mind as he's reflecting on how they just fall back into their training patterns from when he was younger, and they just work together like a well-oiled machine, and that Dick has even gotten better, more capable. And then there's a moment where Dick makes himself vulnerable, sets himself up, and indeed seems to take a serious injury in order to rescue the boy that they're trying to save. And Batman's inner monologue says of Nightwing, he doesn't have the same protection I do. His suit is built for more movement. It will stop the bullet, but not the kinetic force. That impact, something will definitely be broken in his arm. It would feel like being hit by a sledgehammer. He should be knocked down. And then the next panel simply shows Nightwing taking down the bad guy that's holding the boy hostage. And Batman's simple statement is, "My son isn't knocked down." And man, I just found that so moving, because in that moment we see just the pride, the admiration that Bruce has for this young man who he considers his son. And I mean, who is his son? I think at some point there was actually a legal adoption. I don't even know, are there even wards anymore? I mean, there's foster kids. I don't know exactly what a ward is. That was what Dick Grayson was called for years. But at some point, I'm pretty sure they made this adoption legal. So, I mean, he is his son, but it was still just hearing Batman use that kind of language and just the pride you could sense as he's reflecting on just how capable his son has become. I found it really moving. I think all of us as sons, we want affirmation from our dads. And it really caused me to stop and think to myself, I know I tell my boys I love them frequently. That is one thing that we do in our home. And I know I tell them when I'm happy with something they've done or proud of what they've done. But I thought, I shouldn't just wait for those moments where they've done something that is admirable or good. I need to make more of a habit of just out of the blue telling them I love them. Not because of any things they accomplished or any skills they have, even though that's part of what's going on with Batman here is he's admiring his boy's skill. Really, he's more admiring his character, that he's going to persist even in the face of feeling real pain. But I mean, with my boys, of course I would want to acknowledge and affirm those admirable character traits in them. But what I also like to remind them that I'm like, I need to say this more often, is that I love them and they're precious to me simply because they are mine. Not because of anything they do, accomplish, anything they're skilled at or gifted in, but because they're mine. Because that's why God loves us. He's not particularly impressed with anything we're capable of doing. And he is certainly more holy and virtuous than our best moments that we have in regard to those things. But rather, ultimately, God mystifyingly loves us simply because we are his. And I think that's why parents ultimately love their own kids. And I was just reminded here, I need to tell my boys that. So I actually texted them before recording this, just to remind them how precious they are to me. This was a really moving moment for me. And man, anytime a comic book can, whether it intends to or not, bring something like that into my life, that's a good day. That's a good comic book. And that really brings me to my ring selection this week, which is, again, the sapphire ring representing love from last week. Although last week the love was more about, boy, I love this comic book in the same way that I love a piece of easy cheesecake that I make for myself now and then. No. This kind of love is different. It's much closer to the agape love, the compassionate love. It just reminded me of the affection, the love that I have for my boys. And again, that's a special thing for a comic book to be able to remind me of something like that. And I think those are all of my thoughts on comic books for now. As always, I would love to get your thoughts and reactions about this comic or any of the others I mentioned, or maybe one that I skipped this week. I'd love to get your thoughts in the comments below. And then please remember to check out christiangeekcentral.com for tons more content. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.